Get your dirty hands away from that car, boy. You people should know your place. Preston Whitmore grabbed the 13-year-old by his collar and shoved him backward. Beatrice, I don't pay you to bring your kid to work. This isn't a zoo. He threw a push broom at Raymond's feet. Make yourself useful. Sweep. That's all your kind is good for anyway. The technicians laughed. 18 grown men watching a child be humiliated. Not one spoke up. Raymond's mother rushed over, hands trembling as she gripped her son's shoulders. Her eyes begged him, "Please, not here, not now." Raymond picked up the broom, but his gaze never left the Ferrari's open engine bay. That same engine had defeated every expert in the world for 18 months. The billionaire owner had spent $2.3 million. Zero results. Have you ever been dismissed because of how you looked, not what you knew? The Ferrari 250 GTO sat on the hydraulic lift like a wounded king, red paint gleaming under harsh service lights, chrome exhaust pipes catching reflections, one of only 36 ever built, worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Theodore Harrington stood beside his car with hollow eyes. The 68-year-old billionaire had built Harrington Dynamics from nothing. Aerospace contracts, defense technology, a fortune measured in billions. But none of that mattered now. His father had bought this new Ferrari in 1962, drove it home from the dealership in Modena, Italy, taught a young Ted to drive on empty California roads, the V12 engine singing through the hills. 2 years later, his father was gone. Heart attack at 51. The car became everything. A time machine, a conversation with a ghost, the only place Ted could still hear his father's voice. Then came his son, Michael. Ted taught him to drive in this same Ferrari. Watched the boy fall in love with the mechanical heartbeat under the hood. Father and son connected across generations by 12 Italian cylinders. 15 years ago, Michael died. A drunk driver. Wrong place, wrong time. 23 years old. Now the Ferrari was all Ted had left. The last thread connecting him to the two people he loved most. And for 18 months, that thread had been unraveling. The problem started small. A hesitation during acceleration. A tiny stumble that most drivers would never notice. But Ted noticed. He knew this car like he knew his own heartbeat. Something was wrong. He brought it to Titan Automotive, the most exclusive service center on the West Coast. Preston Whitmore III ran the operation. Ivy League education, family connections, a reputation for handling vehicles worth more than small countries. The diagnosis took 3 weeks. The bill came to $48,000. Fuel injection system recalibration, Preston announced confidently. Problem solved. It wasn't solved. 2 months later, the hesitation returned. Worse this time. The engine would stumble, catch itself, stumble again. Sometimes it stalled completely. Ted brought it back. Another diagnosis, another bill, $92,000. Ignition timing assembly, Preston declared. Completely rebuilt. You won't have any more issues. He was wrong. Over the next 18 months, Ted Harrington took his Ferrari to 5 different service centers across 3 countries. Maranello, Italy, the Ferrari factory itself. Technicians who had worked on Formula One cars examined every component, found nothing conclusive. Charged $200,000, a specialist in Munich, then another in London, then the top vintage Ferrari restorer in Connecticut. The bills mounted. The problem persisted. $2.3 million spent. Computer diagnostics, compression tests, fuel analysis, electrical mapping. Every expert said the same thing. We cannot find anything wrong. But something was wrong. Ted could hear it, feel it. The car was crying for help and no one understood its language. Now he stood in Titan Automotive's service bay, listening to Preston Whitmore deliver the same empty promises. Our team has conducted a comprehensive analysis, Preston said smoothly. We've identified several potential contributing factors. Stop. Ted's voice was quiet. Tired. I've heard this speech before. From you. From a dozen others. Just tell me the truth. Preston's confident smile flickered. The truth, Ted, is that this vehicle is 62 years old. Some problems simply cannot be solved. Perhaps it's time to consider other options. Don't. Ted's eyes went cold. Don't tell me to give up on this car. In the corner of the service bay, Raymond Nelson swept the floor. The broom moved in slow, methodical strokes. His body performed the task automatically, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He watched the technicians huddle around the Ferrari, heard fragments of their conversation, technical terms that would confuse most 13-year-olds. Raymond understood every word. Fuel pressure variance, ignition timing drift, carburetor float levels. He had learned this language in a cluttered garage across town, learned it from hands that had touched Enzo Ferrari's own cars, learned it through 5 years of patient teaching that nobody knew about. The engine was running now. The technicians had started it for another diagnostic. Raymond kept sweeping, kept his head down, kept being invisible. But he was listening. And then he heard it. A flutter, a microscopic hesitation in the engine's rhythm, so brief that electronic sensors would round it off as normal variation, so subtle that trained technicians standing 3 feet away noticed nothing. Raymond's broom stopped moving. He knew that sound. Had heard it once before in Giuseppe's garage, an old Alfa Romeo with a problem that stumped mechanics for months. The memory surfaced clearly. Giuseppe's weathered hands pointing to a section of fuel line, his accented voice explaining how rubber aged invisibly, how heat cycles over decades could degrade material from the inside while the outside looked perfect. Raymond's eyes moved to the Ferrari's engine bay, traced the fuel delivery system, found the section of line that curved too close to the exhaust manifold. There. He knew what was wrong. I'm done. Ted Harrington's words fell heavy in the silent service bay. I'm donating the car to the Peterson Museum. Let them figure it out, or let it sit behind glass forever. I cannot watch it die slowly anymore. Preston's face showed relief disguised as sympathy. That's probably the wisest decision, Ted. Some things simply cannot be saved. Do not. Ted's voice cracked. Do not tell me this is wise. This car is my father. This car is my son. And I'm abandoning them both. He turned toward the exit, shoulders bent. A billionaire defeated by a problem money couldn't solve. Raymond watched him walk away. The broom handle felt heavy in his hands. His mother's warnings echoed in his mind. Stay invisible. Stay quiet. These people don't want to hear from us. But Raymond also heard Giuseppe's voice. Every machine tells you what's wrong. The only question is whether you're humble enough to listen. This machine was screaming, and nobody was listening. Raymond set down the broom. Mr. Harrington? The voice was young, clear, steady. Ted stopped walking, turned around. A 13-year-old boy in worn clothes stood in the middle of the service bay. The same boy Preston had handed a broom 20 minutes earlier. I know what's wrong with your car, sir. Silence crashed through the room. Then laughter. Derek Sullivan, the lead technician, doubled over. Kid, that's adorable, but maybe stick to sweeping. Preston's face turned crimson. Beatrice, he shouted, control your son immediately. This is beyond inappropriate. Raymond's mother rushed forward, reaching for his arm. Her voice was a desperate whisper. Baby, please. We can't afford this. Mama. Raymond looked at her. His eyes were calm, certain. I know I can do this. Ted Harrington raised his hand. The room fell silent. "Let him speak." "Ted, you cannot be serious." Preston stepped forward. "This is a child, the son of a cleaning woman. He has no training, no credentials, no qualifications whatsoever." "Preston." Ted's voice cut sharp. "Your credentials have cost me $2.3 million in 18 months. I can spare 5 minutes for someone new." He turned to Raymond. "What's your name, son?" "Raymond Nelson, sir." "And you think you know what's wrong with my Ferrari?" Raymond nodded. "Everyone's been listening to what the computers say, but the computers don't hear what I heard. Your car is trying to tell you something, and I know what it is." Preston Whitmore saw his authority crumbling. A black child was being taken seriously over his expert opinion, in his own facility, in front of his own staff. "Fine," he said sharply. "If Mr. Harrington wants to entertain this circus, we'll do it properly. I'm calling Ferrari North America, the Automotive Certification Board. We'll arrange a formal evaluation." He smiled coldly at Raymond. "1 week from today. You'll have 90 minutes to diagnose the problem in front of qualified witnesses. When you fail, and you will fail, it will be documented permanently." Preston turned to Beatrice, lowered his voice to a hiss. "If your son embarrasses this company, you'll never work in this city again. Not as a maid, not as anything. I'll make certain of it." Beatrice's face went gray. Her hands trembled, but before she could pull Raymond away, her son spoke. "Mama." She looked at him. This strange, brilliant boy she had raised alone. This child who spent weekends in an old man's garage. This son who saw things others couldn't see. "I can do this," Raymond said. "Mr. Giuseppe taught me. I know I can do this." Beatrice thought of every time she had told him to stay quiet, stay small, stay safe. She thought of his father, who died with dreams unfulfilled. She looked at Preston Whitmore's smug face. Then she straightened her spine. "My son doesn't lie, Mr. Harrington. If he says he knows, he knows." The challenge was set. 7 days. News traveled fast through San Francisco's automotive community. A 13-year-old boy claiming to solve what defeated the world's best. The Maid's son challenging certified experts. Preston made sure journalists knew about it. He wanted witnesses for the humiliation. He never considered that he might be wrong. If you've ever been told you were too young or too different to matter, stay with this story. In 7 days, Raymond Nelson will face a tribunal expecting him to fail. What happens next will leave every one of them speechless. 5 years earlier, on a sweltering August afternoon, an 8-year-old Raymond Nelson sat on the curb watching his mother cry. Their Honda Civic had died 3 blocks from her cleaning job. Smoke rose from under the hood. The transmission warning light glowed angry red. Beatrice had already called 2 repair shops. Both quoted over $600. Money she didn't have. Money that would take months to save. Missing work meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant no rent. No rent meant the street. Raymond watched his mother's shoulders shake, watched her press her palms against her eyes, watched her whisper prayers to a God who seemed very far away. "Mama," he said quietly, "can I look at it?" She almost laughed. Almost. But something in his voice stopped her. "Baby, you're 8 years old." "I know, but can I look?" She had nothing left to lose. She popped the hood. Raymond stood on his tiptoes and stared at the engine, a maze of metal and rubber and mystery. He didn't understand any of it, but he wanted to. The next morning, Raymond walked 2 miles to the Oakland Public Library. He found the automotive section and pulled every repair manual he could reach. Chilton guides, Haynes manuals, pages filled with diagrams and specifications. He understood maybe 10%, but he copied everything into a composition notebook, drew the diagrams by hand, wrote questions in the margins. Then he went home and watched YouTube videos until his eyes burned. Engine repair tutorials, transmission diagnostics, fuel system breakdowns. For 7 days, Raymond lived in that Honda's engine bay. His small hands fit into spaces adult mechanics couldn't reach. His fingers traced wires and hoses, matching them to the diagrams in his notebook. On the 8th day, he found it. A loose connector in the transmission sensor. Corroded pins that weren't making proper contact. A problem that 2 shops wanted $600 to fix. Raymond cleaned the connector with a toothbrush, secured it with electrical tape borrowed from a neighbor. The Honda started on the first try. Beatrice Nelson held her son and wept. Different tears this time. Across the street, an old man had been watching from his garage doorway. White hair, weathered hands, eyes that had seen more engines than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Giuseppe Martinelli had worked at the Ferrari factory in Maranello for 30 years. He had tuned engines for racing legends, had drunk coffee with Enzo Ferrari himself, had forgotten more about Italian automobiles than most mechanics would ever learn. Now he was 73 years old, living on a pension in Oakland, surrounded by memories and old car parts. He crossed the street slowly, approached the boy who was still holding a toothbrush and a roll of electrical tape. "You fixed that yourself?" Raymond looked up. "Yes, sir." "No help? No professional tools?" "YouTube mostly, and library books." Giuseppe studied the boy's face, saw something there, a hunger, a focus, a gift waiting to be unwrapped. "How old are you?" "8, sir." "Do you know what a Ferrari is?" Raymond's eyes lit up like sunrise. The 250 GTO is considered the most beautiful car ever made. Only 36 were built. The engine is a Colombo 512, 3-liter displacement, about 300 horsepower. They're worth around $70 million now because... Giuseppe held up his hand, smiling for the first time in months. "Come with me. I want to show you something." The garage was a museum. Ferrari posters covering every wall, engine parts organized on wooden shelves, photographs of Giuseppe standing beside race cars, shaking hands with drivers whose names were legend. In the center sat a partially disassembled V12 engine, the same type that powered the 250 GTO. "I've trained many mechanics," Giuseppe said. "Factory technicians, racing engineers, men with degrees and certifications." He picked up a carburetor, held it out to Raymond. "But I've never met an 8-year-old who could diagnose a transmission problem from YouTube videos." Raymond took the carburetor carefully. It was heavier than he expected, more beautiful. "Your hands are small," Giuseppe continued. "That's not a weakness. It's a gift. You can reach places inside an engine that my old hands cannot." He placed his palm on Raymond's shoulder. "Would you like to learn how a real engine breathes?" Raymond's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sir. More than anything." For 5 years, every weekend and every summer, Raymond disappeared into Giuseppe's garage. His mother thought he was staying out of trouble. She had no idea he was becoming something extraordinary. Giuseppe taught him to hear what others couldn't, to feel vibrations that machines couldn't measure, to understand that engines weren't just mechanical systems. They were alive. "The Germans build perfect machines," Giuseppe told him once. "The Japanese build reliable machines. But the Italians? We build machines with souls." He made Raymond repeat one phrase until it became part of his bones. "Every machine tells you what's wrong. The only question is whether you're humble enough to listen." Now, 5 years later, Raymond finally understood why he had learned all of this. He was born to hear what no one else could. 7 days later, Raymond Nelson walked into Titan Automotive wearing his Sunday church clothes. White button-down shirt his mother had ironed twice, pressed khaki pants, his only tie, borrowed from a neighbor. He looked impossibly small. The service bay had been transformed. The Ferrari 250 GTO sat in the center under blazing lights, folding chairs arranged in rows like a courtroom, a digital clock mounted on the wall, ready to count down 90 minutes. This wasn't an evaluation. It was an execution. Preston Whitmore had assembled his audience carefully. 18 Titan automotive technicians filled the first 2 rows. Most wore smirks. A few whispered jokes about the YouTube mechanic. 4 automotive journalists sat with notepads ready. Preston had called them personally, promised them a story they wouldn't forget. The humiliation of a black child who dared challenge his betters. 3 photographers positioned themselves for the perfect shot, the moment when the boy's confidence crumbled. Victoria Ashford arrived representing Ferrari North America. Blonde hair pulled back severely. Designer suit. 23 years in the industry. She had seen plenty of fools claim expertise they didn't possess. She expected to see another one today. Martin Caldwell, chairman of the Automotive Certification Board, took his seat with obvious irritation. A busy man dragged across town to witness a child's failure. He checked his watch twice before the proceedings even began. Theodore Harrington sat alone in the back row. He had barely slept all week. Hope was a dangerous thing. He had learned that lesson too many times. And in the very last row, pressed against the wall, Beatrice Nelson clutched her purse with white-knuckled hands. Her lips moved silently. Prayers for her son, prayers for their future. Everything they had could disappear in the next 90 minutes. Preston Whitmore stood before the crowd, unable to hide his satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this unusual evaluation. He let the word drip with contempt. We're here to witness a young man's claim that he can diagnose a problem that has defeated certified professionals worldwide. He gestured toward Raymond. The subject will have 90 minutes. He must identify the malfunction, explain his reasoning, and propose a solution. Preston paused for effect. If he fails, which I think we all expect, his family has agreed to issue a formal apology for wasting the time of qualified experts. Raymond stood alone beside the Ferrari. He could feel every eye in the room, could hear whispered comments about his age, his clothes, his skin, but his hands were steady, his breathing is calm. Giuseppe had prepared him for this moment. Before we begin, Preston continued, I believe we should establish baseline competency. A few simple questions to ensure the young man has at least rudimentary knowledge. He turned to Raymond with a predator's smile. What is the precise bore and stroke measurement for the Colombo 512 in a 250 GTO? Raymond didn't hesitate. 73 by 58.8 millimeters. Total displacement of 2,953 cubic centimeters. Preston's smile tightened. The exact ignition timing specification at idle? 8 degrees before top dead center, adjustable based on fuel octane rating. Torque specification for the cylinder head bolts? First pass, 25 foot-pounds. Second pass, 50 foot-pounds. Final pass, 65 foot-pounds. Spiral pattern from center outward. Silence. The journalists stopped writing. The technicians stopped smirking. Even Victoria Ashford leaned forward in her chair. Preston fired more questions. Carburetor float levels, valve clearance specifications, fuel pressure tolerances, distributor cap firing order. Raymond answered every single one. Perfectly. Without pause. Derek Sullivan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a certified Ferrari technician with 15 years of experience. He couldn't have answered half those questions without a manual. This 13-year-old had answered all of them from memory. Victoria Ashford cleared her throat. Mr. Whitmore, I believe the young man has demonstrated sufficient theoretical knowledge. Perhaps we should allow him to actually examine the vehicle. That is why we're here. Preston's face reddened. The quiz was supposed to expose Raymond's ignorance. Instead, it had showcased his expertise. Fine, he snapped. The clock starts now. The digital display began counting down. 90 minutes, 89:59, 89:58. Raymond turned toward the Ferrari, but before he could take a step, The service bay door opened. An old man entered slowly. White hair, wooden cane, clothes that had seen better decades. Victoria Ashford rose from her chair so quickly it nearly fell over. Giuseppe Martinelli? From the Scuderia Ferrari factory team? Whispers erupted through the crowd. The older technicians recognized the name. A legend. One of the last living mechanics who had worked directly with Enzo Ferrari. Giuseppe walked to the center of the bay. Each step is deliberate, each breath earned. He stopped beside Raymond, placed one weathered hand on the boy's shoulder. "This young man has been my student for 5 years," Giuseppe said. His voice was soft but carried to every corner of the room. "I have trained over 100 technicians in my career. Factory mechanics, racing engineers, men with university degrees and decades of experience." He looked directly at Preston Whitmore. "Raymond Nelson is the most gifted diagnostician I have ever taught. If he says he knows what's wrong with this car, then he knows." He squeezed Raymond's shoulder gently. "I am here to witness." Preston sputtered. "This is highly irregular. This was supposed to be an independent evaluation. Outside interference could compromise the entire process." Theodore Harrington stood up. "Preston, if one of the most respected Ferrari mechanics in history wants to observe, we can accommodate him." His tone left no room for argument. Giuseppe walked to the back row, settled into the chair beside Beatrice Nelson, gave her a small nod. "Your son is ready," he whispered. "Trust what I have taught him." The clock showed 86 minutes remaining. Raymond approached the Ferrari, but he didn't grab tools, didn't open diagnostic equipment, didn't rush. He walked around the car slowly, looking, listening, feeling. He placed his palm flat against the fender, crouched to examine the undercarriage, closed his eyes, and breathed. Derek Sullivan laughed out loud. "What's he doing? Trying to communicate telepathically? Maybe someone should get him a crystal ball." Several technicians chuckled. Raymond opened his eyes, looked directly at Derek. "I'm listening," he said quietly. "Something you forgot how to do a long time ago." The laughter died instantly. Raymond turned back to the car. "Please start the engine." A technician turned the key. The Ferrari's V12 roared to life, 12 cylinders singing in harmony. To most ears in the room, it sounded perfect. Raymond closed his eyes again, head tilted slightly, completely still. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Then his eyes snapped open. "There! Did anyone else hear that?" Everyone looked confused. They had heard nothing unusual. "Hear what?" Derek challenged. "It sounds perfect." Raymond shook his head slowly. "No, it sounds almost perfect. There's a difference." He turned to face the clock. 83 minutes remaining. "I'm going to need an analog fuel pressure gauge, the kind from the 1960s, with a needle, not a digital display." The real test had begun. The request confused everyone. An analog fuel pressure gauge from the 1960s, with a needle instead of digital readout. Derek Sullivan crossed his arms. "We have a $50,000 diagnostic computer system, state-of-the-art, and this kid wants antique equipment?" Raymond didn't look at him. "Your $50,000 computer has been wrong for 18 months. I'll try something different." Preston waved dismissively at a junior technician. "Find whatever old equipment we have in storage. Let the boy play with his toys." It took 15 minutes to locate the gauge, dusty, forgotten, buried beneath modern equipment that had failed to solve anything. Raymond connected it to the fuel line with careful hands. His movements were precise, confident. The hands of someone who had done this hundreds of times in a cluttered Oakland garage. "Start the engine again, please." The V12 roared to life. Raymond watched the analog needle. It held steady. 4.5 psi. Exactly within specification. Minutes passed. The audience grew restless. Preston checked his watch with theatrical boredom. 5 minutes. The needle held steady. 10 minutes. Still steady. Derek Sullivan smirked. Looks like everything's normal to me. What a surprise. Raymond raised one finger. Wait. 12 minutes. 14 minutes. 16 minutes. At minute 17 it happened. The needle dipped. Barely. A movement so small that most eyes missed it entirely. Then it recovered. Raymond pointed. There. Did you see that? Victoria Ashford leaned forward. I saw something. A tiny movement. A drop of 0.4 psi, Raymond said. Less than half a pound of pressure, for maybe 2 seconds. Preston laughed. That's nothing. That's within normal tolerance. Every fuel system has minor fluctuations. Raymond turned to face him. His voice remained calm, patient, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. In a modern fuel-injected engine, you would be correct. The computer compensates for minor variations, adjusts the fuel mixture automatically. The driver never notices. He gestured toward the Ferrari. But this is not a modern engine. This is a 1962 carbureted system. No computer, no automatic compensation. It expects perfectly consistent fuel pressure. He paused to let the words sink in. That 0.4 psi drop creates a momentary lean condition. Not enough to trigger any warning. Not enough to register on digital diagnostics that average their readings over time. But enough for the engine to stumble, to hesitate. And sometimes, when conditions align perfectly wrong, to stall completely. Victoria Ashford was writing furiously. This was something no technician had identified in 18 months of trying. Interesting theory, Derek said. His voice had lost some of its mockery. But what's causing the pressure drop? We've tested every fuel system component. The pump is perfect. The filter is new. The lines were inspected. Raymond nodded. I know. I read the reports. Every component tests perfectly in isolation. He began pacing slowly, thinking out loud. Something works fine when it's cold, tests fine when you examine it separately, but fails when the entire system runs hot, under real conditions over extended time. He stopped pacing. Something that changes with heat. The clock showed 58 minutes remaining. Raymond dropped to the ground and slid under the car. His church clothes scraped against concrete. The white shirt his mother had ironed so carefully was getting dirty. He didn't care. His small body fit easily into spaces where adult mechanics would struggle. This was what Giuseppe had taught him. Your hands are small. That's not a weakness. It's a gift. Raymond traced the fuel line with his fingertips, inch by inch, following it from the tank toward the engine. His hand stopped at a section near the exhaust manifold. Flashlight, please. Someone handed one down to him. Raymond examined the fuel line section carefully. It looked perfect. No cracks, no visible wear, no obvious damage. It would pass any inspection. Raymond slid out from under the car. His white shirt was now gray with dust, his khaki pants stained at the knees. But his eyes were bright. This section of fuel line is original, he said. From 1962. 62 years old. Derek shrugged. Original components are valuable in vintage cars. We don't replace things that aren't broken. It's not broken, Raymond said. It's tired. There's a difference. He walked to where Victoria Ashford sat. Ma'am, may I explain what I believe is happening? She nodded, intrigued. This fuel line runs within 2 inches of the exhaust manifold. Every time the engine runs, that section gets hot. Very hot. Then the engine stops, and it cools down. Raymond held up his hands, demonstrating expansion and contraction. 62 years of heat cycles, thousands and thousands of times. The rubber expands when hot, contracts when cold, over and over. He continued. The outside of the rubber still looks perfect. You can inspect it visually and it appears fine. But the inside, the part you cannot see, it has degraded. Microscopic cracks, tiny inconsistencies in the material. Victoria Ashford was nodding slowly. When the engine heats up, that section of line heats up too. The degraded rubber expands slightly. The inner diameter narrows by a fraction of a millimeter. Raymond pinched his fingers together. Not enough to block fuel flow, not enough to trigger any warning, but enough to reduce pressure by 0.4 psi. He pointed to the analog gauge. Then the engine cools, the rubber contracts, returns to normal. You test it, and everything checks out perfectly. The problem disappears until the next time conditions align. The room was silent. Giuseppe Martinelli rose slowly from his seat in the back row. Every eye turned to him. "I have seen this twice in my career," the old man said. "Both times on vehicles over 50 years old. It is nearly impossible to diagnose because every standard test shows normal results." He looked at Raymond with pride that needed no words. "You cannot find this problem with computers. You can only find it by understanding how materials age, how heat affects rubber over decades, how engines speak to those who know how to listen." Martin Caldwell, the certification board chairman, leaned forward. "Even if this theory is correct, how do you prove it? How do you demonstrate that this specific section of line is the cause?" Raymond had been waiting for this question. "I can prove it right now." The clock showed 34 minutes remaining. Raymond asked for basic tools and a length of modern fuel-rated hose. "I want to bypass this section with a temporary line. Same diameter, same length, different material. If I'm right, the pressure fluctuation will stop completely." Preston saw his last chance to stop this. "Absolutely not. You want to modify a $70 million vehicle based on a theory? Based on a guess from a child?" Theodore Harrington stood up. "It's not a guess. It's a diagnosis." His voice was firm. "Let him proceed." Raymond went to work. What happened next silenced every skeptic in the room. His hands moved with precision that seemed impossible for his age. He cut the bypass hose to exact length, connected it with practiced efficiency. Each movement is confident, professional. In Giuseppe's garage, he had done this hundreds of times. On old engines, on broken systems, on machines that everyone else had abandoned. His small fingers worked in spaces where adult hands could not reach. The gift that Giuseppe had recognized 5 years ago. 8 minutes later, the bypass was complete. Derek Sullivan examined the work despite himself. The connections were solid, clean, professional quality. "This is actually good work," he admitted quietly. Raymond wiped his hands on his already ruined pants. "Start the engine." The V12 roared to life. The analog gauge needle held steady at 4.5 psi. Everyone watched. 5 minutes. Needle steady. 10 minutes. Needle steady. 20 minutes. The time when problems typically appeared. Needle steady. 30 minutes. Not a single fluctuation. The engine ran perfectly. Raymond let the silence stretch. Then he spoke. "Now I'm going to remove the bypass and reconnect the original line." He worked quickly. 3 minutes later, the original fuel line was back in place. "Start the engine." The V12 roared again. The needle held steady. They waited. At 22 minutes, it happened. The needle dipped, recovered, dipped again. At 26 minutes, the engine stumbled. A hesitation that everyone could hear now that they knew what to listen for. Raymond let the engine run a moment longer. Then he signaled to shut it down. The silence was absolute. He turned to face the audience. A 13-year-old boy in grass-stained church clothes, facing a room full of experts who had expected him to fail. "The repair requires a $40 fuel line and about 30 minutes of labor." He let that number hang in the air. "This car has been to every Ferrari expert in the world, 5 service centers, 3 countries. You spent $2.3 million looking for a problem that was hiding in 60 cents worth of rubber. His voice remained calm. No gloating, no anger. The line wasn't broken. It was just old, just tired. It was asking for help. He looked directly at Preston Whitmore, and nobody was listening. Victoria Ashford rose to her feet. Her voice carried through the stunned silence. In 23 years at Ferrari North America, I have never witnessed a diagnosis this elegant. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. This isn't just competence. This is artistry. In the back row, Giuseppe Martinelli wiped tears from his weathered cheeks. He had taught Raymond to listen, and Raymond had heard what no one else could. The clock showed 6 minutes remaining. Raymond hadn't needed them. Theodore Harrington hadn't moved from his seat. His hands gripped his knees. His eyes glistened with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 18 months, hope. Raymond, his voice was hoarse. I need to be certain. I need to drive this car. Preston stepped forward immediately. Ted, we haven't conducted a full safety inspection after the modification. The liability alone... Preston. Ted's voice cut like steel. The boy did a diagnostic bypass with the fuel line, not heart surgery. I'm driving my car. He stood slowly, walked toward the Ferrari like a man approaching a grave, or a resurrection. Raymond watched him, understood something that the others in the room couldn't see. This wasn't about proving a diagnosis correct. This was about a man trying to find his father and son again. Mr. Harrington? Raymond's voice was quiet. May I ride with you? Preston nearly choked. Absolutely not. A child in a $70 million vehicle? The insurance implications alone are catastrophic. I cannot allow... You cannot allow it? Ted turned slowly. His eyes were dangerous. This is my car. My decision. The boy diagnosed what your entire team couldn't find in 18 months. He looked at Raymond. He rides with me. The Ferrari's door opened with a sound like a whispered promise. Ted slid into the driver's seat. Leather worn soft by 6 decades of use. His father had sat here. His son had sat here. Now a 13-year-old stranger sat in the passenger seat. A boy who had heard what nobody else could hear. Ted turned the key. The V12 engine sang to life. 12 cylinders breathing in perfect harmony. For the first time in 18 months, the sound didn't fill him with dread. They pulled out of the service bay into San Francisco sunlight. The crowd watched them disappear around the corner. Nobody spoke. The route Ted chose was deliberate. Every road that had betrayed him before, every hill where the engine had stumbled, every intersection where he had held his breath, waiting for failure. Pacific Heights, the steepest streets in the city. Grades that punished weak engines and exposed hidden flaws. The Ferrari climbed without hesitation. How did you learn all this? Ted asked, eyes fixed on the road. You're 13 years old. Raymond considered the question. Mr. Giuseppe says age doesn't matter. Only attention matters. He says most people stop paying attention when they grow up. They start trusting machines instead of themselves. Ted nodded slowly. He sounds like a wise man. He's the wisest person I know. Raymond paused. Except maybe my mama. They drove in silence for a while, through traffic, up hills, down valleys. The engine never faltered, never hesitated, never stumbled. 20 minutes into the drive, they reached the intersection at Pacific Heights where the car had stalled 3 times last year. Ted's hands tightened on the wheel, his jaw clenched. The Ferrari climbed the hill smoothly, powerfully, perfectly. Ted's grip relaxed. His breath came easier. At a red light near the top, his hands began to shake. Not from fear this time, from something else entirely. My father taught me to drive in this car. His voice cracked. Summer of 1973. I was 16. He sat right where you're sitting now. Raymond listened. He died 2 years later. Heart attack. No warning. Just gone. Ted's eyes stayed fixed forward. This car became everything. The only place I could still feel him. The light turned green. He didn't move. Then my son came along. Michael. I taught him to drive in this same car. Same roads. Same lessons my father taught me. A car behind them honked. Ted ignored it. 15 years ago, a drunk driver took him from me. 23 years old. His whole life ahead of him. Tears rolled down the billionaire's cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. When this car started failing, it felt like losing them both again. Like even their memory was being taken from me. Raymond understood loss. His father had died when he was 3. He barely remembered him. But he remembered his mother's grief. The weight she carried every day. The car wasn't failing you, Mr. Harrington. Raymond's voice was gentle. Older than his 13 years. It was just tired. And it needed someone to understand. Ted finally turned to look at him. This small boy in dirty church clothes. This child who had given him back something he thought was lost forever. You gave them back to me, Ted whispered. Both of them. The car behind them honked again. Ted put the Ferrari in gear and drove. 35 minutes after leaving Titan Automotive, they returned. The engine had not stumbled once, had not hesitated, had not failed. For the first time in 18 months, the Ferrari 250 GTO ran exactly as it was meant to run. Ted Harrington parked the car and sat motionless for a long moment. Then he turned to Raymond and extended his hand. Not downward, the way adults usually address children. Straight out, as an equal. Thank you, Raymond. Raymond shook his hand. They were never gone, sir. The car just needed someone to listen. The crowd inside Titan Automotive had waited in tense silence. When the Ferrari pulled back into the service bay, every eye fixed on Theodore Harrington's face. He was smiling. Not the polite smile of business meetings. Not the practiced smile of public appearances. A real smile. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. Preston Whitmore's face went pale. Victoria Ashford approached the car immediately. Mr. Harrington, the results? Ted climbed out slowly. Looked around the room at the technicians, the journalists, the experts who had gathered to witness a child's failure. 35 minutes, he said. Every road that broke this car before. Every hill. Every condition. He paused. Not a single problem. Not one hesitation. The boy was right. The room erupted. Journalists shouting questions. Technicians whispering in disbelief. Cameras flashing. Through it all, Raymond stood quietly beside the Ferrari. His mother rushed forward and wrapped him in her arms. Tears streaming down her face. Victoria Ashford raised her hand for silence. The room slowly settled. She turned to Raymond with an expression he had never seen directed at him before. Respect. Mr. Nelson, Ferrari North America operates a Young Technicians Pipeline program. Full scholarship to any technical high school of your choice. Summer internships at our facility beginning next year. And when you're old enough, guaranteed apprenticeship in our Heritage Restoration Division. She smiled. We haven't seen talent like yours in a generation. We'd be fools not to invest in it. Raymond looked at his mother. She nodded, still crying. Thank you, ma'am. I'd like that very much. Theodore Harrington stepped forward. And I'm establishing an educational trust in your name. Full funding through doctorate level if you want it. No conditions. No strings. He turned to Beatrice. Mrs. Nelson, I'd like to offer you a position as household manager at my estate. Full-time, full benefits. A salary that means you never work 2 jobs again. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Raymond will have full access to my garage, Ted continued. I have a few other vintage cars that might benefit from his attention. Finally, he turned to Giuseppe, who stood quietly in the back. Mr. Martinelli, I'm funding the complete restoration of your workshop as a training center. Teach others what you taught Raymond. Giuseppe's eyes widened. One condition. Ted smiled. Raymond helps you teach. The old man looked at his student. The boy who had arrived in his garage 5 years ago with engine grease on his fingers and stars in his eyes. Deal. Preston Whitmore watched his world collapse in slow motion. The journalists were no longer interested in a child's humiliation. They had a better story now. A 13-year-old genius who solved what certified experts couldn't. A $40 fix after $2.3 million in failed repairs. And Preston Whitmore's name was attached to every single one of those failures. Victoria Ashford approached him with a pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Whitmore, I'll need complete service records for Mr. Harrington's vehicle. Every diagnosis, every repair, every invoice, standard post-case review. Preston's throat tightened. Of course. I'll have my assistant compile everything. Today, please. Her smile sharpened. Ferrari North America takes these matters seriously. The audit began that afternoon. What it revealed was devastating. 18 months of service records, $2.3 million in charges, detailed invoices for comprehensive repairs that should have solved the problem. Except the original fuel line had never been touched, never inspected, never replaced. Charges for components that tested defective, but were later proven functional. Labor hours that didn't match actual work performed. Diagnostic fees for procedures that were never conducted. The pattern was clear. Either catastrophic incompetence or deliberate fraud. Ferrari North America issued a formal complaint. 3 other luxury brands initiated their own audits. Clients who had trusted Titan Automotive with irreplaceable vehicles began demanding answers. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Preston's father-in-law, who had secured his position 15 years ago, was notably absent. His wife, Clara, refused to take his calls. But the service records weren't the only evidence that surfaced. Anthony Brooks had worked security at Titan Automotive for 7 years. He had watched, listened, documented. The day after Raymond's diagnosis, Anthony contacted the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. His evidence filled 3 folders. Emails showing qualified candidates rejected with pretextual excuses. Interview notes containing discriminatory comments. A systematic pattern that blocked minorities from technical positions for over a decade. He called it maintaining standards, Anthony told investigators. What he meant was maintaining the color of his staff. The EEOC opened a formal investigation. 3 former job applicants joined a potential class action lawsuit. Employment lawyers circled like sharks, sensing blood. 2 weeks after Raymond Nelson diagnosed a 62-year-old fuel line, Preston Whitmore III issued a brief statement. I have decided to step down from my position to pursue other opportunities. There was no severance package, no farewell celebration, no letter of recommendation. His name was quietly removed from industry conferences where he had lectured about professional standards. His membership in the Automotive Excellence Council was revoked. His reputation, built on connections rather than competence, crumbled like wet paper. But not everyone who participated in Raymond's humiliation chose the same path. 3 days after the diagnosis, Derek Sullivan appeared at Giuseppe's garage. Raymond was there, working on an old Alfa Romeo engine. Derek stood in the doorway, uncomfortable in his own skin. I've been turning wrenches for 16 years, he said quietly. Thought I was good at this. Thought I understood the engines. He swallowed hard. You made me realize I forgot why I started. Got lazy. Trusted screens instead of my senses. Stopped listening. Raymond watched him silently. I know I was a jerk to you. I know I don't deserve anything. Derek's voice cracked. But would you teach me? How do you listen like you do? Raymond looked at Giuseppe. The old man's expression said everything. Your choice. Raymond considered. Derek had mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him in front of everyone. But Giuseppe had taught him that everyone deserves a chance to learn. That was how Raymond got his chance. Saturday mornings, Raymond said finally. 6 a.m. Bring coffee for Mr. Giuseppe. He almost smiled. He likes it strong. 1 year later, a new sign hangs above a restored garage in Oakland, Martinelli Nelson School of Automotive Arts. Inside, Giuseppe Martinelli sits in a comfortable chair, watching his legacy continue. Raymond Nelson, now 14, stands before 12 students, former mechanics who lost their jobs, teenagers from the neighborhood, 2 former Titan automotive technicians seeking redemption. On the wall behind him hangs a framed photograph. A red Ferrari 250 GTO gleaming under service lights. Beside it, painted in elegant script, the words that changed everything. Every machine tells you what's wrong. The only question is whether you're humble enough to listen. Raymond picks up a carburetor, the same type Giuseppe handed him 6 years ago. Forget everything you think you know, he says. Today, we learn to listen. Raymond Nelson walked into Titan Automotive holding a broom. He walked out holding the future. Not because someone gave him permission, but because he refused to let others decide his worth. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is yours. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss stories like this. And tell us in the comments, what gift are you carrying that the world hasn't recognized yet? There's a detail in this story that only sharp-eyed viewers will catch. Go back to the moment Raymond first heard the engine. Watch his eyes. That's the moment everything changed. If it were you, standing in that service bay with a broom in your hands and a room full of people expecting you to fail, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed invisible? Hit subscribe to Muse Stories. Share this story. And remember, the world is full of Raymonds, waiting to be heard.
Preston Whitmore thought he was handing Raymond a broom to teach him his place. What he actually handed him was a stage. 90 minutes later, that boy didn't just fix a $70 million Ferrari. He exposed 18 months of expensive incompetence. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. That boy diagnosed it in 90 minutes. A $40 fuel night aged from 62 years of heat. Every expert missed it because they trusted computers over their ears. Giuseppe taught Raymond something Preston never learned. Every machine tells you what's wrong. You just have to be humble enough to listen. Preston was too arrogant to listen. Too convinced credentials meant competence. Too certain a black kid with a broom couldn't know more than Harvard engineers with diagnostic tools. So Raymond showed him, not with anger, with a precision earned in an Auckland garage, while Preston bought his position with family money. Think about the Raymonds around you right now. How many times have we walked past brilliance wearing wrong clothes, speaking wrong accents, holding wrong tools? Raymond spent 5 years learning machine language, started at 8 fixing his mom's transmission with YouTube and toothbrush. Nobody saw that brilliance, just saw a black kid who didn't belong near Ferraris. So, be honest. If Raymond approached you, dirty clothes, oil-stained hands, claiming he could fix what experts couldn't, would you hand him a broom or let him listen? Tell me below. Subscribe if talent doesn't need permission. Share this with someone waiting to be hurt, because somewhere another Raymond holds a broom waiting.